Hello, my name is Karen Rispin, and I would like to talk to you about ways to understand nature. Most of you who are listening to this are probably people who are worshipers of God and followers of Jesus Christ. And one of the ways we often encounter nature is in worship. If you look at the worship songs we sing in church, the backdrops are very often pictures from nature. The same is true with the words of the hymns, for the beauty of the earth, all creatures of our God and King. And many other hymns are based around how we can worship God in and with nature. There are different ways to understand nature, and some of the models of reality seem to be painful to us or confusing. So I would like to go through some of that and look at ways to understand nature. I'd like to start by saying I was working as an associate professor of biology at LeTourneau University, and at LeTourneau, which is a faith-based university, I taught ecology, environmental science, comparative anatomy and physiology, introduction to biology, and so on. And these concepts were things that we dealt with, and so I'm sharing with you some of what was developed while I was working as a professor. We have three great relationships. We have a relationship with God Himself, we have a relationship with others, and we have a relationship with nature. I guess I really should say we have three great categories of relationship because, of course, our relationship with others is many relationships, and the same with our relationship with nature. It's a relationship with many locations, places we love, animals we care about. We're interconnected with creation. And yet at church, very often, there is more focus on the relationship with God and others, and the relationship to creation may be downplayed, but it's absolutely essential as well. And we'll see that it was there right in the beginning in the explanations of who we are as human beings. In today's world, there are some conflicts that seem to build a tension between science and Scripture. And I would like to look at some of those and look at how they can be painful. Some are a conflict between science and Scripture. Some are misunderstandings or models of reality or understandings of Scripture that can in themselves be damaging. And we'll look at some of those as we go on. But I would like to propose that these things do not need to be damaging, nor do they need to make tension and fear. Here's James 3. Wisdom is a way of dealing with knowledge. Wisdom is how we intersect with what we think we know, and with other people, and with nature and God. Are there some wise and understanding among you? Then your lives will be an example of the humility that is born of true wisdom. But if your heart is full of rivalry and bitter antagonism, then do not boast of your wisdom. Do not deny or warp truth to serve your own ends. That type of wisdom, winning at all costs, does not come from God. It comes from this world, from your own lower nature, even from the devil. For wherever you find jealousy and rivalry, you also find disharmony and all other kinds of evil. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. So you can see here that when it's describing wisdom in James, it's centered on thoughtful, peaceful interactions. When we begin to choose sides and get antagonistic, which is our human tendency, we're walking away from this type of wisdom, which is based on gentleness and humility. It doesn't mean in any way that the truth isn't there. It's just how we deal with the truth. Let's look at a little bit to do with the nature of knowledge. Sometimes I think a lot of the conflict and tension comes from a misunderstanding of the nature of knowledge. In other words, is knowledge the same as truth? Can we totally know the truth? And does that mean that there isn't any truth there? Those are models that sometimes says, well, you understand something different than I understand, therefore my truth is different than yours. Well, let's look at this a little bit and see how that fits in. This is 1 Corinthians 13, right at the end of the love chapter. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away, for now we know only in part. For when the perfect comes, the imperfect disappears. Now we see but a poor reflection in a mirror. Then we will see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am known. In other words, knowledge will pass away because it's incomplete. Here's an illustration. Both science and scripture agree that there is truth out there. Otherwise, why should you ever do science? Why should you follow God or not if there is different truth? There's no truth out there. Both of these are meaningless. But both of them agree that truth is out there, but it is not perfectly knowable. And here's an example just in everyday life. Many of you may be sitting in a chair or sitting on something, and you have a model in your mind that that chair is strong enough to hold you up. You may not be able to describe the exact color of the covering of the chair or the strength to failure of the legs of the chair or the molecular composition of the thread in the seat cover or any other small details, but you have a working model of the chair. You do not have a complete understanding of that chair. You have a working model. When we make these working models, a basic principle all of us follow to some extent is called Occam's razor. This was first stated in this form by William of Occam, an English Franciscan friar who lived from 1287 to 1347. It's also called the principle of parsimony. All things being equal, the simplest solution tends to be the best one. This is a very important principle in doing science. It's called the principle of parsimony. And this is actually from an encyclopedia. The preference for simplicity in the scientific method is based on the falsibility criterion. For each accepted explanation of a phenomenon, there may be an extremely large, perhaps incomprehensible number of possible and more complex alternatives. In other words, if you're driving your car and it goes and stops, and you look at the gas gauge and it says empty, your explanation may be the car ran out of gas. That's the simplest explanation. There are other explanations. Perhaps an alien from space zapped it and fused the engine. Perhaps a neighbor who hates you put sugar in the gas. There are so many other explanations, but the simplest one is probably the correct one, and that's called the principle of parsimony or Occam's razor, and we'll return to this. In the scientific method, you probably all learned this in school, you observe, you make a hypothesis or prediction based on the simplest explanation of what you observed. You experiment or test it, and you come to a conclusion. And it's usually reiterative. Coming to a conclusion opens another question, and you go back and try it out. So with the car, you would go back and make the conclusion, the car ran out of gas. You would then fill the car up and see if it started. And it rolls on like that, and you make a model of what's going on. I'm going to tell you the story of some blind men and an elephant. Maybe you're familiar with this story. It's a famous fable that's been around for a long time, and it's really about the nature of observational knowledge. One time, and I'm going to tell as if it was in India, one time there were 3 blind men traveling on the Great Trunk Road in India, and in the 1850s there were caravanserai periodically where you could stop at night, where people and animals could kind of have a place to stay, kind of like a campground near each other. And the blind men who were begging along the road stopped there. And next to them was a man with an elephant, a mahout, traveling with an elephant. And in the night, one of the blind men got out to find the facilities, and on the way back, he bumped into the side of the elephant. And he felt the side of the elephant, And he thought, this is so strange. It's like a wall, but it's warm and breathing. And he went back to his friends and he said, guys, there's a live wall over there. And one of the other guys said, that's crazy. I'm going to go see. So he went over and he bumped into the elephant's front leg. Bonk. And he was a little guy, so he felt the front leg. And he thought, this isn't like a wall, but it is warm and it moves. It was kind of like a tree trunk. And he went back and he said, no, there's not a live wall over there. There's a tree trunk. And the third guy said, this is even crazier, a live wall, a live tree trunk. I'm going to go see. So he goes over, and by now the gentle old elephant was awake and she reached out with her trunk. Well, he felt and encountered something that felt like a python, only it was warm, and of course it was breathing on him. And he rushed back and he said, it's a big snake. And so they're starting to argue and talk about it. No, there's a live wall, there's a live tree, there's a live snake. And the guy who was with the elephant, the mahout, woke up and he said, you guys, it's an elephant. They kept going back to check, and they got different pieces of the elephant. But this concept of going back to see what you will find and refine your model and your understanding of truth is scriptural. Here's a passage from Acts. Now, the Berean Jews were of more noble character than those in Thessalonica, for they received the message with great eagerness and went back and examined the scriptures to see if what Paul said was true. You go back and check. The three guys each went, one encountered it, the others who checked, they found different pieces. Their models didn't match, and neither did they match that of the mahout. But that didn't make the elephant not there. Knowledge has to be held with humility because we always have small pieces of the pie. But truth is rock solid. There really is an elephant in the room. And if you look, you will see that each of the blind men was in his own way correct. The front leg of an elephant is rather like a tree. The side of an elephant is rather like a wall. The trunk of the elephant is rather like a snake. And the mahout would have a model of that elephant as well. He would know more about her, but he wouldn't have a complete understanding of the truth of an elephant. Who is she in the eyes of her creator? How much blood does her heart pump each beat? What's her heart rate? How long is the gestation period? He might not know all of those things, but he has a working model and he can work with his elephant. He can interact with her and interact with the rest of the world and the elephant in a successful way. He has a working model. The blind men, not so much. Theirs was quite incomplete. But if they went back and interacted with the elephant and with the mahout, rather than arguing with one another, they could over time build a more complete model. And in a sense, that's where we all are. So if we end up hearing something that seems to contradict what someone else says they know, to hold truth with hold our knowledge of truth with humility and go back and look again is a wise idea. Presuppositions determine models. Let's go back to the car running out of gas. If you have known beforehand that you had just filled up the car and the gas gauge was broken, you may have a different working model. You have a pre-understanding, something that from outside the actual event that informs your understanding of an event that happened. And when you look at science, there are two very basic presuppositions that differ from one another. One of them is called scientific naturalism and one is called supernaturalism. Just because one has the word scientific on it doesn't mean that's the only way to do science. In fact, we'll see that many of the earliest groundbreaking scientists themselves would have been supernaturalists. Let's look at the definition of these terms. Remember, these are presuppositions. These are not gathered from the science themselves. They are a framework in which you do science. Scientific naturalism is a view according to which all objects and events are part of nature. That is, they belong to the world of space-time, what some people call the space-time continuum. There's nothing outside of it. All physical events are determined by prior physical events. The mission of science is to explain the observable world, so we'll erase everything outside of it and only look inside there. Naturalism says that psychological phenomena are basically physical. This makes it difficult to understand how there could be a free will of mind. This is actually from a University of Helsinki. It was just a nice explanation, so I borrowed it. So naturalists are classical materialists. They're only looking inside the space-time continuum. Here's Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Its current usage, naturalism, derives from debates in America in the first half of the last century. The self-proclaimed naturalists from that period included John Dewey, Ernest Nagel, Sidney Hook, and Roy Wood Sellers. These philosophers aimed to ally philosophy more closely with science. They urged that reality is exhausted by nature. In other words, there's nothing outside of it, containing nothing supernatural, and that the scientific method should be used to investigate all areas of reality, including the human spirit. So they've a priori eliminated everything outside the space-time continuum. It's kind of a circular reasoning. Science looks at what's in the space-time continuum. Therefore, there's nothing outside of it. Those two things, actually, it's a circular reasoning that doesn't hold together. But it does lead to problems. This is C.S. Lewis talking about naturalism. If you look only inside the space-time continuum and you don't have free will, and the space-time continuum and who stays alive is survival of the fittest, you're left without free will, you're left without ideals, you're left without love, you're left without many things that didn't just help you stay alive. So here he says, you can, if you wish, regard all human ideals as illusions that better one's chance of producing offspring, and all human loves as biological byproducts. We are reducing ourselves to a mechanism and in the end have produced the abolition of man. And he wrote another book called The Abolition of Man on that topic. So there is another point of view called the supernaturalist. So if you think there is something outside the space-time continuum, you would be a supernaturalist. The supernaturalist believes that one thing exists on its own and has produced the framework of space and time and the procession of systematically connected events that fill them. And for someone who is a follower of God, we would say this thing outside the space-time continuum is the one we call God. And for those of us who have personal encounters or have felt God's hand in our lives, we're a little bit like the person who knows that that gas tank was full, so they're not going to just look by that it all happened by accident. We know that there is a God there. So both positions are a priori positions, and they color what you'll see. However, you can look inside the space-time continuum to see what you would expect if you held to the position of naturalism or supernaturalism, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. You can look inside the space-time continuum for what you might expect logically if there is a God and supernaturalism is true, or if there is not a God and the naturalistic point of view is true. And we'll go on to look a little bit more